Hello, this is Josh Findlay with the Election Protection Podcast, and we are back for Season 2, Midterm Edition. I'm the director of the Election Protection Project, a national election integrity initiative. And on this podcast, we talk all things election integrity. We are joined today by Mississippi Secretary of State Michael Watson, who is also, and this is going to become very important later in our conversation, President-elect of the National Association of Secretaries of State. And so we have got a lot of things to talk about as we head into the midterm elections here. Secretary, thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome. Glad to be with you today.
You know, we forego the traditional bios here on this podcast, but I'd love you to just take a minute and tell us a little bit about your background, how you got involved in politics, and particularly Secretary of State.
Yeah, I'll try to make a real long story as short as I can. I grew up in the home of a minister. My dad was a pastor. Obviously, my mom was a pastor's wife. And so my sister and I both kind of had service just drilled in our heads. You help people, love the Lord, and help others. So that's kind of been what we've tried to do our whole lives. I thought early on in my life I'd maybe go into ministry because my dad's a pastor. And then also thought about public service, really starting in fifth grade. And so it's kind of odd, but I did some things in my path going upward from there to try to figure out if that's really what I wanted to do. And wound up in the legislature. So I ran for the state legislature when I was 29 years old, got elected, served for 3 terms there, and was leaving actually politics and kind of had that time clock in my head. Look, I don't have to do this forever. Maybe somebody else can come in and do a better job. And so I was sitting down with the governor at the time, Phil Bryant, who was terming out of office. And he said, look, what are you going to do? I said, man, I can just go home. I can make more money. At the time, I had a wife and 2 beautiful little girls, and now I have 3 little girls. But thought, it's probably the end of the road. Maybe who knows what happens next. And he said, well, what about Secretary of State? And I said, well, no, sir, I don't want to be Secretary of State. Never thought about being Secretary of State. As you well know, sometimes in life, those little seeds are dropped in your mind and they don't go away. So you eventually have to start praying about them, and got a peace about it and felt like, you know what, I know what the office does. I feel like I could do the job well. And so we had a long conversation with my wife and decided to jump in, and we were fortunate to win against long odds, but we had a plan. So that's how I got here and really have enjoyed it. It's been a great run and enjoyed my time in the office.
Well, that's wonderful. And you certainly got elected at a difficult time, right? When election integrity became at the forefront of things. Was this even on your radar before you were elected Secretary of State?
I had worked on a couple of issues, I guess, during my time in the state Senate. For 12 years, there are a few elections issues we worked on, voter ID and a few other things. And so I'd had some experience with that. But again, there's no way in the world you could have forecasted what happened in 2020, especially with COVID. So I get elected in 19, I get sworn in January, and then bam, here's COVID in a huge election year. So we had a lot of good people in the office. And I think that's been the key to our success, making sure that I got people around me who are smarter than me, who care about doing the right things and will challenge me if I'm going in a direction that may be questionable, and sit down and let's hold each other accountable. Let's do the right thing for the right reason. And so our team has been a great asset for the state of Mississippi.
Well, one thing that I think is interesting about life is a lot of times some of the best things come out of the challenges that we face. And you were elected at such a difficult time, but I think that has led you to also become one of the most innovative secretaries of state in the United States. The reason that you're on my radar so often is because you are trying things that nobody else will try. And I want to dig into a couple of those things because I think everybody should use these things as a model. The first thing are these post-election audits that you've been working on. And I know audit is a scary word to a lot of people in election integrity, sure, right? But one thing that we believe here is that our election should be more of a counting exercise than a political exercise, right? It is a transaction between a person and their government. And you should have standards in place, and you should be able to go and look at how those transactions were executed. So tell us a little bit about these post-election audits that you were able to get across and why they're different from what people typically think of when they talk about an audit.
Yeah, so look, high level really quickly, you kind of mentioned it there. Secretary of State is probably the office that should be the least partisan that there is, because people want fair elections. And that's one of the things that we try to focus on. Look, I don't hide from me being a very conservative individual, but when it comes to elections, it should be fair for everyone. I didn't get elected just by conservatives to serve conservatives. I got elected to serve the entire state. And so we've tried to preach that message. And I think post-election audits are one of the most important things that we can do So we built relationships with all of our circuit clerks, kind of rolled this idea out, started talking to them, and several of them had issues, and not surprisingly so. You would think, well, gosh, what if I'm doing something wrong and my voters are going to find out? So they had a little bit of pushback. One of the things they asked for, and I thought this was really important, give us the opportunity to respond to the issues that you may find, which I thought was great. Well, absolutely. If maybe you thought the law said this, but you're acting in a little bit different way and trying to get elections done this way, I think your voters deserve to know. I didn't mean to do this wrong. I was just, long story short, that's been really good because I think now citizens can see, hey, we're going to look at how they did affidavit ballots. We're going to look at how they did absentee ballots. Did you test your machines prior to? Did you follow the law and how they're supposed to be run? Elections are supposed to be run by statute here in Mississippi. And if you can say, yes, I did all the right things, it returns that confidence back into the system that, yeah, we audited this election. It was run correctly. The numbers are what they are. And again, I think the whole idea behind that is turning the confidence back to voters to make sure they understand the vote that I cast is the vote that was counted.
So what kind of things do you look at in these post-election audits?
Yeah, that was one of the things really interesting on the front end. What exactly do we want to focus on? And so there was a long conversation with the legislature. Actually, there are multiple types of audits that you could do. We were looking at a couple of different ones. And so we came out with this procedural audit. And again, it's based on what does the statute require for our circuit clerks, commissioners, whomever else to do to make sure these elections are run properly by the law. So we went in and looked, what are the biggest ones that make the most difference when it comes to elections? And look, we've seen tied elections in Mississippi. Other parts of the country have seen them as well. So when you come down to that, well, did we count our affidavit ballots right? Were the ones that were counted for this election, should they have been counted? Did we do our absentee ballots right? Look, again, that's a lot of times people have a lot of questions about mail-in ballots, about absentee ballots. So it's the bigger ticket items like that. Did you test your machines on the front end to make sure that whoever cast a ballot on this machine, that is the ballot that's going to be counted? So things like that make sure that voters say, well, gosh, if they tested their machines, if I know that they did their absentee ballots right, if I know they did their affidavit ballots right, things like that can make that big sway in an election. If we did those things right, then yeah, I can trust what the election said. So very important. And the second piece of that is not only do we get to say, hey, voters, look, we did this audit. Here were the results. If something was a little bit off, we get to train our clerks even better, even closer, more specifically to issues that they may have been, maybe I didn't quite understand like I should have. So it's a double-edged sword there, both being good on this occasion. The voters get to see, hey, look, they did this correctly. And if they didn't, we get the additional chance to train our clerks and our commissioners to do an even better job moving forward. So it is a win-win for the voters of Mississippi and something that we're really proud of here in our state.
And this is one thing that we talk about all across the country. We're big supporters of this and model legislation that tracks kind of what y'all are doing. I also know in talking to a lot of election clerks, like you said at the beginning, they're a little bit hesitant about implementing this, right? They don't want somebody looking over their shoulder, especially with some of the passions and how deep they run about our elections right now. I know you went on a tour to every county in Mississippi to talk to the election clerks about this, the election administrators. What was your message to them about why they should buy into these audits?
Well, I think number one, I wanted them to understand, look, I'm coming to your turf. I'm going to sit down in your office and ask you how I could be a better Secretary of State to serve you in your job. Look, as a lawyer, we all want the experts in the room. Well, I know the experts in elections in Mississippi are our circuit clerks and our commissioners. So going number one is spend time with them to make sure they understand this is a team effort. Yeah, I may be the Secretary of State, but it takes all of us to run good, clean, fair elections. Number two, that I would take the time to come to your office and sit in your office to make sure that I'm on your turf. You're in charge of this office, but I'm here to ask, how can I better help you? Building that trust and those relationships was fantastic. And I think the most important thing that I did was tell them, look, if there's something that I'm doing that doesn't quite make sense, I want you to let me know. Hold me accountable too. We're all in this thing together, and it's pretty funny. During COVID, there was one of the issues that I talked about on statewide TV and radio one time that they didn't agree with, and I had been to a number of their offices, and they took me up on the idea to come tell me if I'm doing something wrong. So I got a phone call. There were about 14 or 15 of them wanted to come visit. I said, "All right, sure." About 35 minutes in, I got the sense that they were calling me an idiot and that I'd done the wrong thing. And what I loved the most from that, they didn't call me an idiot, but what I loved the most from that was they took the idea that I said, please come to tell me, hold me accountable too. I'm just as accountable as you are to me. So I think that was really important, and that they know that we have that trust now has been really good for us to work through issues like post-election audits, or like some of the other legislation that we've been able to pass, that they have that responsibility of, you know what, I know I can call Michael, have a conversation with him. If I don't agree with something, he's going to at least listen to me and give me the opportunity to explain myself. So it's been a really good working relationship.
I love that. One thing that I find, it's in everybody's interest to have smooth elections, right? And I find that the more time we spend face to face, the more we can dialogue about this stuff, the better the communication and the results are. So I love that.
Yep.
Now, you just performed these audits following the 2024 election, and I have read your post audit press release on this. Why don't you share with everybody what you found, right? And I know what the headline is, but then also, elections, when you're running 82 different ones, right? One in every county, they're never going to be perfect. What are the types of things that you've been able to see in this through this process?
Yeah. So look, most of them have been just minor issues.
Yep.
And I think that's another thing you point out there. Yeah, there are 82 counties. There are 82 circuit clerks. There are, what is that? 410 elections commissioners, 5 per county. So somebody may look at a statute and say, well, this is what I think it says, so I'm going to implement it this way. Well, with this audit process, we get to go through all 82 of them to make this as consistent as we possibly can by walking through these issues. Say, look, if you said something that maybe I didn't count one of the absentee ballots that I should have, and the reason why I did that was because I didn't completely keep my log clear and keep these ballots separate over here. Just again, minor little issues. But as we walk through those and say, no, this is how it should be done, and then you implement that across the whole state, you get the consistency. And again, you get the accountability from voters that can see what exactly happened at my circuit clerk and my commissioner's office. So it's been really good, really rewarding for us as well, again, to get in there and make sure that we're earning their trust. We're not here to hurt you. We're not here to slam you. We're here to help you, to make you better. And that helps all of us. So it's been a great process so far.
That's great. And, you talked about seeing kind of minor issues, right? I think it's important for people to recognize that no election is perfect. Right?
Okay.
You've got all of those pieces of paper. There are issues that pop up. Generally, they are minor. But if they're addressed, like what happens in your post-election audits, there's something we can all learn from. You talked about training, right?
Yeah.
Training on that.
It's kind of funny you say there's no perfect election. I'll give you one quick example. I got a call the first very early in the morning on a primary election here in the municipal elections this year, and one of the poll workers said, "Hey, look, we don't have our box, our ballot box." And I was like, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, the poll delivered, the guy was going to deliver the box here, the manager, he got his car towed last night. So the poll box is in his car in a tow yard in Alabama." So we're like, we've got to back up. We're going to be okay. But you just never know. To your point about elections aren't perfect. There's always going to be maybe a precinct that opens late. There's always going to be maybe we'll run out of ballots here or do something, there. We just got to perform the best that we can and make sure that we understand humans are running these elections and no human is perfect. So to give grace to them and to give them thanks for doing the hard work of running an election is something that's very important to us as well.
Oh, that's great. That's great. But that also brings me to another one of your initiatives, innovations that I love. This TextMyGov that you've got going. If I understand this correctly, it allows voters to directly text the Secretary of State's office if they're having issues voting, if they see any issues at polling places, things like that. And I love this because so often when we've been reporting issues in election integrity, it has to go through a middleman, a party, a county, a whatever else. And these need to go directly to the people that can fix things. So tell us a little bit about what inspired this and how it's been. I believe you just executed it for the first time in these most recent elections, right?
Brand new. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we started pretty early in on an Elections 101 campaign. And so what we wanted to do with that was, look, again, let's explain to our voters the whole entire process of elections. From the time that you go register to vote, to the time that you cast your ballot, to the time that it's counted, how it's reported. I want to know everything across the process, so I'm comfortable with it. If I know more about it, I feel like, you know what, I can participate in this because I understand how it works. But also, if something goes wrong, who do I question? Who's in charge of what in this whole process? Well, through TextMyGov now, once we've kind of taught them more about the process, we want to make sure they've got the accessibility to come back and say, by the way, I saw this or I saw that, to bring in that accountability ultimately, because now voters can just straight to us, shoot a message, They can get responses back. Obviously, on frequently asked questions, they come back with a quick response. If not, we're going to have someone call them to reach out and say, hey, look, if this is going on, you should probably call local law enforcement. If this is going on, let's make sure we talk to your poll manager. If that's going on, let's call your circuit clerk. So again, it gives them the accessibility to ask those questions, but also the accountability to make sure they know I can reach out to somebody, I'm going to get a response, and I can know, hey, somebody heard me, and if something went wrong, then yeah, we're going to have some accountability.
And you just touched on this a little bit, but I think it's important to emphasize this, because one of the big complaints going back years in election integrity is that people report things to various entities and don't hear anything back. What kind of operation do you have on the back end of that so that people can answer the texts with information?
Right. So we encourage everybody, if you see anything that's a little bit off, that, gosh, it may be absolutely fine, but you just think, I'm not real sure about that. We want to know about it. And we do a couple of things there. Number one, we're gonna get to the bottom of it. We're gonna do our research. We're gonna go talk to folks to make sure we understand exactly what happened, because there's been instances where people have called and they may have heard something a little bit differently or saw something that they, gosh, I'm not exactly sure what I saw. We can then call the clerks on the backside, hey, explain this. And once they explain it, you know what, that's perfectly legal. There's nothing wrong with that. We call the voter back, hey, this is exactly what happened. This is what the statute says. Everything's fine. On the flip side, something goes wrong and it's actually an issue. We will basically build the entire case and send it over to the Attorney General's office and or the local district attorney's office, whoever has the prosecutorial authority to go after those issues of voter fraud. And I think that's another important piece that we should all talk about. It isn't just the Secretary of State here. You've got to have prosecutors that are willing to go after these election fraud cases, because if they don't, people don't think they're held accountable. Well, I'm going to do it again. And so that's one of the things that we really focus on here in Mississippi as well.
Oh, that's so important. I'm glad you touched on that. A common talking point of the media is that there's no election fraud. We know that it happens, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not at the scale that some people think, but it happens, and it does. And the best way to deter it is to prosecute. Absolutely. 100%. So I love to hear that partnership is working well in Mississippi. I want to change gears for just a second. In August, I believe, you're going to become president of the National Association of Secretaries of State. Tell our listeners a little bit what that entails, because in my mind, that is an incredibly important and influential position.
Yeah, so number one, just kind of off the top here, I want folks that listen to this podcast to know there are so many good men and women serving as Secretary of State across this country. A lot of times, obviously, the politics get us, sideways or divisive in certain issues and areas. But there are some folks that are on the other side of the aisle that I consider great friends, just good human beings, good believers. And we may see politics a little bit different, but again, at the end of the day, they're a good human being that's molded and made after the image of God. So we got to look at it that way first. And so my important part is, let's build relationships. Let's make sure we can work together. One of the things that we're going to focus on with our administration, obviously, voter roll maintenance. It's so important and something that every one of us, no matter if it's RD, should be doing. So we're going to focus hard on that. We've worked a lot on human trafficking and the awareness here in Mississippi. And so most Secretary of States have business services departments and divisions. And so we found that working with our businesses to get their employees trained on human trafficking, what to look for, what to see, has had great results in fighting human trafficking. So that'll be another one we focus on. And then again, just in general, so many Secretary of State's offices have different components. Some may have museums, some may have libraries, some may have, like us, scrap metal dealers, athlete agents. You just never know from state to state. They're a little bit different. So being flexible and making sure that, look, if somebody's got a question, I'm going to find a different state to partner them with, to mentor them through that problem or that issue. That's the role that I hope to play as president of the National Association, but really excited to serve in that capacity and hopefully, again, build those relationships and challenge them, making sure that they're doing their jobs and encouraging them along the way.
Oh, we love that. So we're going to give you a chance to practice something here. Your first meeting, I imagine you're going to have to give a speech after you're sworn in, right? And we don't need your exact words here, but talking about voter rolls specifically, since this is an election integrity podcast, what are you going to tell the membership about voter rolls and how we can improve them?
Right. Again, and I think this goes back to what I said initially, and it should be one of the most nonpartisan offices there is. And at the end of the day, what we want are fair, honest elections, period. And one of the cornerstones of that is voter roll maintenance. You've got to make sure you got the folks that should legally be on those voter rolls. They should be the only ones that are casting ballots in our elections. We've seen a lot of conversations about non-citizens. We've seen a lot of conversations about, again, states not purging their rolls when people are living in multiple states or wherever they live and come back and vote. So those are issues that at the end of the day, that should not be R, it should not be D. That should just be fair.
That's right.
And so focusing on that message of fairness, making sure, again, that's democracy. If you want to get out there and yell from the top of your lungs about protecting democracy, let's have fair and honest elections. And that starts with having clean voter rolls. So that's going to be one of the main pieces of information that I try to get across to our friends.
And so if you could wave a magic wand and say, all of the secretaries of state are going to implement these 2 or 3 things, what would those be? What's at the top of your mind?
I will tell you from the president's executive order dealing with elections, one of the biggest pieces in there is the SAVE verification system. The work that's going into that, and we've been working closely with the White House on that here in Mississippi and a few other secretaries that we've pulled to the table. But it's basically going to serve now as a dashboard with so much other information now plugged into the backside of that, where it's going to be a fantastic tool for every state to use. And again, this shouldn't be partisan. It shouldn't be, well, yeah, it's President Trump, so I don't want to do it. You got to throw it out the window. This is a great tool to make sure that your voter rolls are clean and maintained. And so really looking forward to that piece and encouraging every one of them to, hey, look, let's get on board here. Let's do some work. To that point, we've got a meeting coming up here in a few weeks, and the White House said, look, let's reach out. Let's get a little bit different group of secretaries, and I want you to include some of the Democrats that we can talk to that are willing to work, not up here to make a show, but are willing to come in and do the work. Let's talk to them about what we're doing here with this executive order and why we think some of the pieces really make sense for them too. So we're really excited about that meeting. But again, it's all about, in my mind, building a good team. It takes all of the secretaries around the country working together, pulling in the same direction. So we can get those issues that are just bedrock, just foundational to clean elections, and we can pull in the same direction on those. You're going to see some good things happen.
Well, of course, we as conservatives love this executive order. It does tremendous things that have needed to happen for a long time. What do you think are the points that you're going to be able to talk to your Democrat counterparts about and maybe find some common ground on?
Yeah, again, I think the biggest one so far is just seeing the work on the SAVE database. Many of us had MOUs with them before. There were some conversations in the last administration where Republicans weren't treated very fairly. And again, this is not partisan. I think it's so important to get the message out. And I have to my friends, look, they want you to come in and work with them as well. This is not just a President Trump, a soundbite. This is something that's good for elections across the board. So making sure that they understand this is a tool that we can use to clean all of our voter rolls. On that, we've also talked about working between states, and we've got MOUs between about 7 states now with us, Mississippi, where we're exchanging data between states to see who's moving back and forth between states. I think we had about 7,000 names on our first match with Alabama of people who either lived in Mississippi but were also registered in Alabama, or who lived in Alabama and also registered in Mississippi. So it's things like that we can do amongst the states themselves as well, that we're going to be working with our friends in other states. Some of the R's that have blue or red and blue states, however you want to call it. Again, that's just common sense. And that shouldn't be a hard thing to get across and to work on. So taking that SAVE database out of the executive order there and what they're really doing a great job with, and also what we can do between states. Those are going to be some of the partnerships that I'm hoping to push. And again, seeing a White House that's willing to reach out and say, hey, I don't care what party you're in, elections should be fair. Here are the tools that we want to offer you as well. And we've had a few that have reached out prior to this meeting to the White House asking them, hey, can we maybe talk about how we can use this system too? So I'm really excited about that. Again, I think that's something that it can be used as a huge talking point, and I get it, I understand politics. But at the end of the day, it's what's right. It's what works. And when you can have clean voter rolls, that returns a lot of confidence to the process.
Well, that's really encouraging. That's really encouraging. I'm glad to hear that people are reaching out proactively. Just a couple questions left. First one relates a little bit to voter rolls, I think. We've heard a lot about voter ID in elections, right? Whether it's from the SAVE Act, whether it's, all of the different ways that you could potentially vote illegally, things like that. Just a brief answer, if you will. What do you think is needed to improve voter ID laws across our country?
Well, I think putting it into practice is the most important thing. It's you can have a law.
That's fair.
If you don't,
That's fair.
If you don't put it in practice and again hold people accountable when they don't, what good is the law? And so I think you can take states like Mississippi where, I think we've actually produced probably around 9,000 to 10,000 IDs for people who did not have IDs. That's a great thing. You come in, it's easy, it's free. From the initial standpoint, we were actually giving people rides to the clerk's office to get their IDs. And they can then use those IDs for other purposes as well. So it's just common sense. And when you think about, again, you talk about politics, you talk about polling, voter ID is off the charts in both parties. So why in the world would you still resist something like that? It just makes so much sense. The men and women that fought for our freedoms, honoring them by having good, clean, fair elections that they fought for. This is just a piece that's so in my mind, again, and obviously the vast majority of Americans too, voter ID just makes sense. So number one, getting that law passed and making sure that it's effective. But number two, implementing it on the back end. And that's been something that's been very successful here in Mississippi.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, Secretary Watson, one last question. We're going to ask you to be a little bit predictive here.
Okay.
What is the future of election integrity? Whether issues that we need to be on the lookout for, legislation that needs to get passed, following a presidential election, there seems to be a lull sometimes. We've talked about how it's not quite the case right now. But what is the future of election integrity? What can we expect over the next couple of years?
I think you're seeing a big push right now, ranked choice voting, making sure that we get that banned. And we have a ban here in Mississippi. I think you're going to see a big push in foreign funding coming in for some of these ballot initiatives. You're going to see us kind of tighten down on that. We're going to work on that here in Mississippi. Another thing that I think people should be aware of is lawfare. When you get these last minute groups that come in, and I'm not saying just R or D. We're seeing it more on the D side now, but you'll see a friendly come in and sue the state, and a Secretary of State will say, well, gosh, I can actually maybe I'd try to change a little bit of election law through a settlement outside the scope of the legislature and or my state constitution. I hope we're seeing the end of that, but unfortunately, I think we're just seeing the beginning of it. You're going to see more lawfare in elections, and that's unfortunate. But it takes good people like y'all spreading the word, making sure people are aware of what they're seeing so they know when I see it, this is exactly what's happening. And I need to hold my Secretary of State accountable. And I'll say, look, I'm the first one. If I do something wrong, I hope the citizens of Mississippi that listen to this podcast know Michael means it. Hold me accountable first. And I think all of our secretaries should have that same position, making sure that they're held accountable first to make sure we've got clean and fair elections.
Well, thank you so much. Secretary Watson, you've been incredibly generous with your time. Would you like to plug any social media or where people can find what you're working on?
Now, look, you can go to obviously our website and Google Mississippi Secretary of State. MichaelWatson.ms is where I am. So feel free to go to check us out and take a look at us. But looking forward to, again, just doing the work. I think that's the important piece, focusing on getting good, clean, fair elections here in Mississippi and implementing the laws that the legislature passes. So we'll see how it goes.
Well, thank you for joining us. This is Josh Finlay with the Election Protection Podcast, joined by Secretary Watson, the Secretary of State of Mississippi. Thank you.